If you grew up in a difficult household, you might find yourself wrestling with a strange, heavy question. Tell me, why does the parent who didn't yell, who didn't hit, and who didn't actively terrorize you still trigger such intense feelings of guilt, confusion, and deep resentment? Society has a very straightforward way of defining abuse. We look for the active actions of the primary aggressor, the narcissist who brings the rage, the manipulation, and the blatant cruelty. Because of that strict definition, we make a flawed assumption about the other parent in the room. We overlook the non-aggressive peacemaker, assuming they're just another helpless victim caught in the crossfire. That assumption carries a heavy cost. It keeps adult children blind to the systemic nature of what they actually survived, trapping them in a fog of guilt for feeling angry at their seemingly safe parent. But the safe parent is rarely a passive bystander. They are the structural keystone. Without them, the entire narcissistic family system simply couldn't exist. Therapists look at these dynamics through a concept called family homeostasis. It's a psychological machine designed to maintain its own balance and prevent collapse, no matter how toxic the daily inputs might be. This maps the gears of family homeostasis. The narcissist acts as the driving gear, generating a chaotic, relentless force. Unchecked, this stress would tear the family apart. The enabler acts as the transmission gear, absorbing and translating this erratic force for the family. The enabler absorbs this friction to avoid a direct confrontation with the narcissist. They will do absolutely whatever it takes to keep the gears turning and prevent the system from jamming, which leaves the remaining friction to be absorbed by the driven gears, the children. The system forces them into rigid, highly specific functional roles just to keep the family machine from shattering. For a child slotted into this machinery, the costs are severe. They experience deep confusion, self-doubt, chronic anxiety, and a persistent, lingering feeling that they are going crazy. Realizing that your safe parent actively facilitated this mechanical transfer of abuse is emotionally devastating. But this realization is the necessary first step toward breaking the generational trauma cycle. To keep this machine running smoothly, the enabler constructs a fictitious reality. It's a carefully manufactured environment built entirely to avoid holding the narcissist accountable. Looking at the enabler's toolkit, the first major strategy is reframing. This repackages blatant cruelty into an acceptable character trait. You hear this in phrases like, "That's just how he is," or "Your mother is passionate, she doesn't know her own strength." The hidden trade-off here is damaging. By calling it a personality quirk instead of a choice, the enabler teaches the child that toxic behavior is biologically unchangeable and must be accommodated forever. When reframing fails to keep the peace, the enabler turns to their second tactic, shifting the locus of control entirely onto the victim. This sounds like, "Just don't rock the boat," or "If you hadn't talked back, he wouldn't have gotten so upset." The psychological impact on a young mind is severe. The child internalizes the false belief that their own actions, their obedience, their silence, are responsible for managing the unpredictable emotions of the adults around them. Years later, this script manifests in adult cycle breakers as chronic people-pleasing, fawning behaviors in the workplace, and paralyzing anxiety around anyone in authority. These two linguistic tactics work together perfectly. The narcissist dodges all personal accountability, and the enabler preserves their good parent persona at the child's psychological expense. Another toolkit strategy is recruiting, or parentification. The child is elevated to a co-manager of the abuse. The enabler explicitly asks the child to help manage the narcissist's volatility. "Help me keep your mother calm tonight," or "I need you to be the strong one." Then there is silent complicity. This occurs when the enabler physically stands in the room, watching the verbal or emotional abuse happen, but refuses to intervene or voice a single objection. They stay quiet for one primary reason: self-preservation. By saying nothing, they avoid drawing the narcissist's wrath onto themselves. Choosing to stay silent is a specific choice. By bypassing the verbal duty to protect, the enabler emotionally abandons the child, which functions as a form of covert abuse. The final phase of the enabler's cycle is staging normalcy. The system demands that the family's public image be protected at all costs. This creates jarring realities, like forcing the family to sit down for a holiday dinner mere minutes after a screaming match. The neurological consequence of this whiplash is massive. It invalidates the child's lived reality, causing deep cognitive dissonance and a fractured, unstable sense of self. The enabler's toolkit represents a strategy that prioritizes the system's survival over the child's psychological safety. Confronting all of this brings us to a difficult reality. Adult children are often paralyzed because the long-term enabler is usually trauma-bonded, experiencing their own intense form of abuse from the narcissist. It is valid and healthy to hold compassion for the psychologically trapped position your enabling parent was in, but compassion does not erase accountability. Understanding their trauma does not excuse their failure to protect you when you were vulnerable. Because of this dynamic, trying to force a long-term enabler to validate your past abuse is rarely successful. Pushing for that validation usually triggers intense denial, anger, or deflections like, "I did the best I could." You end up wasting your emotional energy on someone whose entire identity relies on protecting their abuser. The core therapeutic task here is a process called differentiation. It is the capacity to separate your own internal emotional reality from the family's toxic narrative. In practical terms, differentiation means setting strict boundaries, or in many cases, choosing to go completely no contact with the enabler. This map illustrates the consequence of that boundary. The enabler acts as a literal pillar holding up the narcissist. When you remove your complicity, it's like pulling out that pillar. Without you absorbing the friction, the system collapses. This is the defining trade-off. You walk away from the illusion of a functional family in order to restore your own sanity, your emotional safety, and the permanent end of generational trauma cycle.